Thanks everybody for being here today. We may have some technical issues because there's a really bad thunderstorm going through the valley right now. So we'll see what happens as we move forward here. But welcome to the spring meeting of the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation Board of Associates, and what we hope will be our last virtual meeting. We hope you and your families have been safe and healthy during these challenging times. We have some new members of the Board of Associates that I'd like to extend a warm welcome here today. First, my friend Adrian Shanker from Bradbury Sullivan LGBT Community Center. Bruce Bytel, who's the Township Manager for Lower Macungie Township. Charlotte Hartman Hansen, who's a new member of the Board of Governors of the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation. And Margaret McConnell, who's with People's First Federal Credit Union. So we welcome them, and I hope we can all meet and greet them in person in September. A few weeks ago, in discussions with the staff about today's meeting, the topic of term limits for the Board of Associates Executive Committee and officers came up. While we officially have one-year terms that are renewed automatically unless someone is replaced, we've not made any changes since we began more than 3 years ago. As a result of those discussions, I decided to step up and start the transition. Today will be my last meeting as chair of the Board of Associates, and I will also be stepping down from the executive committee. It's been an honor and a privilege to be your chair during these beginning years and get this Board of Associates started, and I hope it flourishes well into the future. Thank you for all your support over this time. Sybil and I can't tell you how pleased we are that our friend Marty Barron has agreed to participate in today's panel. Sybil and I have known Marty since his first year at Lehigh back in the early 70s. So I was class of 74, Sybil was class of 75, Marty was class of 76. I'm not going to tell you what that means in terms of what's coming up and to how long we've known each other, but it's been a while. Just as an aside, Sybil and Marty were inducted into Phi Beta Kappa Honor Society on the same night. So Marty, I don't know if you remember that, but I was there when it happened. We've remained in close contact over the years and have kept in touch quite often. My advice to Marty when he retired was to learn how to say no. And this is one of those times I'm glad he didn't take my advice. And we're also thankful that Marty made the introduction to Karen Rundlet, one of our other panelists. Thank you, Marty, for your help in making this thing possible. Lastly, housekeeping. Please remember to stay on mute. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the panel discussion, at which time we'll take questions via the chat box or live from speaking up. We appreciate your participation and interest in a respectful discussion. Speaking of transitions, Lehigh Valley Community Foundation has a new CEO, and we hope to have an in-person farewell event for Bernie at our September gathering, currently scheduled for 4 o'clock, September 23rd at Saucon Valley Country Club. But Erica, congratulations on being our CEO, and we all look forward to working with you. I'm proud to introduce Erica Petrozelli, our CEO, for a Lehigh Valley Community Foundation update. Erica?
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. And again, apologies for the bad timing on the storm today with our meeting. We're receiving it pretty good here, so hopefully everyone can hear me and see me okay. Thank you, Mike Stershik, for your leadership in getting the Board of Associates off the ground the last 3 years. It is your last meeting to say farewell to everyone, but it is my first meeting to welcome everyone, and I'm really happy to be here in this capacity. We're very excited to see everyone in person in the fall to properly celebrate Bernie. As Mike said, please save the date for September 23rd at 4 p.m. at Saucon Valley Country Club. It will be a much deserved celebration for Bernie. One more in-person event on the horizon is an Allentown neighborhood walk with Hassan Bots and Promise Neighborhoods. We will be learning through experience and immersion on June 29th from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So wear your comfortable shoes. The invitation will be coming out in the next few days, so please be on the lookout if you're interested. Back to today. The silver lining of being virtual today is the opportunity to host such an esteemed and highly respected group of journalism experts. It all came together so perfectly that I'm not sure it would have happened if we would have been in person. I have to thank Stephanie Olexa, one of our Board of Associates members and a fund holder, for talking through many ideas with us and putting us on this path. Also a big thanks to Cindy Lambert for nudging Mike Stershik to give his old friend Marty a call. During the pandemic, community foundations across the country have taken the time to focus on their community leadership, LVCF included. Community leadership distinguishes your community foundation from other charitable giving platforms. As a community leader, we act as a community partner that creates a better future for all by addressing the most critical challenges, inclusively uniting people and resources, and producing significant, lasting results. We are demonstrating our community leadership today by sharing important information with you about a critical issue in the Lehigh Valley, the importance of independent and high-quality local journalism. This is not an issue unique to our area. We are one of many regions facing huge what ifs and what nows. We hope that today's panel stimulates dialogue and promotes understanding among our group so we can begin to craft impactful solutions to the question of what now. You'll be hearing more about our focus on community leadership in future meetings, but please don't hesitate, as always, to give us a call to ask about how we are using our voice to better our community. Before our panel gets started, and the storm gets really bad, I want to recognize and sincerely thank our sponsor, Advanced Cleaning Solutions. We are very pleased to be working with a locally owned and disabled veteran-owned small business for our cleaning services. We appreciate their support today, and I welcome Jennifer Ward to the screen for a few remarks. Jennifer, I turn it over to you. Please remember to unmute as well before you speak.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Erica. We are very pleased to sponsor this event. I am Jennifer Ward, and along with my husband, Nick Ward, we own and operate Advanced Cleaning Solutions. We are a full-service commercial cleaning company based here in sunny Center Valley, Pennsylvania, servicing Eastern Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. For those of you not familiar with us, as Erica mentioned, we are also a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. Nick, my husband, is an Army veteran. He served 3 tours of duty in Iraq. And with the onset of COVID, our business obviously has evolved in a unique way. We have always taken customer service very seriously and are both deeply involved in the day-to-day aspects of the business. But as you can imagine, like all industries these days, we are different than we were just a few short years ago and do not take lightly the work that we do to fight the pandemic. That said, both myself and Nick's prior experience in work and life has given us unique perspective. I personally am a Bethlehem native and in fact worked for the Morning Call as an advertising sales executive in 2008. So I just missed the privilege of working for the organization when David Erdman joined. Just as I was leaving the Morning Call, it was very clear that we were about to experience major changes in both the lens of a news consumer and as someone who sold advertising for the newspaper. We were just starting to sell advertising for the Morning Call online, so of course opportunities were exciting for us, but the idea of what the traditional newspaper would be like in the short future was also very curious to us all. Now, 2008 doesn't seem like so long ago, but in thinking about all of the changes and disruptions we have all experienced since then, perhaps it does seem like a lifetime ago. That said, I'm happy to be here today to introduce today's moderator, David Erdman. As editor-in-chief and publisher of the Morning Call from 2009 to 2016, David oversaw all aspects of the Call's portfolio of digital and print products, reaching more than 70% of the market in the Lehigh Valley. For his 3 decades of commitment to journalism, he was recognized by the Pennsylvania News Media Association with the 2016 Ben Franklin Award for Excellence. David now serves as a Muhlenberg College lecturer in media and communications. So over to you, David.
Okay, now that I've unmuted, thank you very much. And I want to really thank the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation for recognizing that it is as important to support these issues of press and democracy and First Amendment as other community causes. So by having us here today, supporting initiatives such as Spotlight Pennsylvania, which you do, you're really demonstrating these are very vital causes. So thank you. So in our title, we talk about living in a digital world, okay? What does that really mean? What is a digital world today? In 1996, when we launched themorningcall.com, we added an option for users to comment on articles. We envisioned how opposing points of view would inform each other and lead to greater understanding. Well, 25 years later, I think we'd be hard pressed to find something that's turned out as badly and unexpectedly as it has. Where are we today? Well, we're kind of in a morass of social media vaccine misinformation, malicious conspiracy theories, right? And deliberate lies that spread like wildfire. The internet today resembles more of the town square of centuries ago. Rather than people reading the Washington Post, they'd be gathering in the town square to gossip about the king. 50 years ago, media philosopher Marshall McLuhan predicted the advent of what we know today as the internet. He seemed to be thinking about social media when he said, we'll have this extreme concern with everybody else's business and much involvement with everyone else's life. It's a sort of Ann Landers column writ large. So written like some 40 years ago, I really think that's where we are. This environment today is so mixed, collaborative, reliant on word of mouth, that rumors or deliberate mistruths are passed for fact millions of times over, often before being corrected or retracted, or never being corrected or retracted. It's so dysfunctional that Facebook last week took the unprecedented step of banning Donald Trump for 2 years from its network for inciting violence. But like it or not, social media is where most people get their news. Meanwhile, Google and Facebook have decimated the local ad market. They capture 60% of United States digital advertising revenue that was once almost totally claimed by newspapers in local ad markets. So let's look at the media landscape today. Social media is America's main news source. About 2/3 of Americans, 68%, get their news from social media, but almost 60% expect it to be inaccurate. They expect it to be wrong, but we continue to go there. Because why? Of course, we know it's convenient, it's fun, it's easy to use. And the news we're interested in is there, sometimes to the exclusion of other news and other topics, but it comes from trusted sources, friends, family, coworkers, and others like that, okay? Social media users are also very ill-informed. Those who depend on social media for news have lower political knowledge. Only about 17% of those who look to social media for news have high political knowledge. This is according to a Pew Foundation study. They're less likely to be able to answer questions about current events. They are most likely to have heard the conspiracy theory that the pandemic was intentionally planned, which of course it was not. We always feel we have to say that. Finally, disinformation spreads like wildfire on social media. False stories are 70% more likely to be tweeted than accurate ones. False stories are 70% more likely to be tweeted than accurate ones. Research at MIT found that humans, not bots, spread the most misleading information. And the spread of false news is worst with political news. A study in Columbia University revealed that 6 in 10 of you will share a link without reading it. So where are we left? American newspapers are decimated. And when I talk about newspapers, I don't want to dwell so much on the paper side because these organizations are, for the most part, already digital operations that also happen to publish a newspaper. But since 2004, about 2,100 newspapers have folded. That's about 100 a year. Coronavirus has made it worse. And a study at UNC's School of Media found there are almost 1,800 news deserts in the United States, areas where there's no longer a local news outlet. Okay, on top of all this, there's erosion of trust. More than 9 in 10 Republicans say their trust in media has decreased in the past 10 years. Some comment, and you've seen this, they hope newspapers will go out of business. Well, they're getting their wish. More than 1 in 5 newspapers have closed in the past 15 years. But when a local newspaper shuts down, the mix of voices is depleted, and usually nothing sprouts up to backfill what was lost. Now, instead of checking your doorstep to see if the newspaper has arrived, you might be checking to see if it has survived. This trend has hit tragically close to home. The Morning Call's newest owner, Alden Global Capital, took over ownership on May 21st, along with other storied titles, including the Chicago Tribune, the Hartford Courant, and the New York Daily News, and also the Baltimore Sun. The Morning Call is joining a network of 200 newspapers owned by Alden Capital. This recent news has subscribers wondering whether the Morning Call, which was groomed into one of the nation's top 100 newspapers over 118 years of ownership by the Miller family, will they survive? Since 1895, and will it now survive? Well, why? Because Alden has a track record of sharply reducing costs by eliminating journalist positions. They forego maintenance at their properties where journalists are reporting leaky roofs and other substandard conditions, or they shut down offices altogether. This already is the plight of the Morning Call, where journalists no longer have an office, as everything has been sold off, from the printing presses to the building itself. Wealthy people across the country and in the Lehigh Valley, for whatever reason, failed to step up and join an effort to purchase the Morning Call or other Tribune newspapers. Could it be because the public is unaware of the crisis? Pew Research found that 71% of Americans said that their local news media was doing well or somewhat well financially, even though only 14% said they had actually paid for local news in the past year. Then there's the outright attack on the media by political leaders as the press as the enemy of the people. How far we've come from 1787, when Thomas Jefferson famously declared that, quote, "Were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I should not hesitate to prefer the latter." There's also generalized ignorance of the purpose of the press. In a national survey by the First Amendment Center, Americans were asked to name at least one of the 5 rights protected under the First Amendment, but nearly half of respondents were unable to mention any of the rights guaranteed under the amendment. Some legislators, including several senators, have stepped forward to say the crisis is so bad, the media industry deserves government protection. Well, as downright depressing as this all is, this time of industry trouble has seen bright spots. There are inspiring efforts, such as the University of Berkeley creating newsrooms to cover areas of California where there are no media, the news deserts. That effort in Berkeley is being run by former Morning Call investigative editor Christine Chivo, coincidentally. There are also experiments, such as our panelist, Chris Baxter's. Chris, of course, runs Spotlight Pennsylvania, joining dozens of successful nonprofits dedicated nationwide to carrying on the important work of investigative journalism. Local media startups are flourishing. Some 50+ independent digital news operations have launched this year, and 250 in the last 5 years. Some 24 alone have been launched under a program that one of our panelists, Karen Rundlet, helped with the grant from the Knight Foundation. Karen is joining a growing ranks of foundation directors seeking to save American journalism. Knight recently has announced a $300 million initiative in February to help rebuild local news. As director of the Knight Foundation Journalism Program, Karen will tell us about her focus on investing in new methods and models to advance journalism and civic media as a way to support local, informed communities. And some newsrooms have really flourished in this troubled environment. I think on a tide of a national thirst for facts. Those include panelist Marty Barron's former newsroom at the Washington Post, Dean Baquet's newsroom at the New York Times, and others. Jeff Bezos purchased the Washington Post in 2013 and increased staff and improved the digital strategy. The Washington Post has won 10 Pulitzer Prizes under Marty's tenure. He was directly involved in the effort to free the paper's Tehran bureau chief from imprisonment in Iran, and sharply criticized then President Donald Trump for turning a blind eye to Saudi Arabia's role in the murder of Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. The Philadelphia Inquirer to our south and a few other legacy media companies are also experiencing a renaissance under its new nonprofit ownership mode. So with that background, I'd like to turn to our panel now to break this all down for us. So we're going to have each of our panelists speak for a few minutes, starting with Chris. Chris, I introduce you. Thank you for doing this for us. Welcome.
Thanks, David. Great to be here. And thank you to the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation, too, for hosting this really important discussion. And obviously in what I think is a really important state, Pennsylvania. I'm honored to be a part of this panel with all folks that I deeply admire, and two of whom are my previous bosses. My first job was for the Morning Call, first covering Easton and the suburbs, and then later at Allentown City Hall. So I have a deep affinity for the Lehigh Valley. I'm happy to be a part of this. Before starting at the Call, the editors there actually had encouraged me to start right after graduation, but I told them no because my dream internship had been handed my way to intern in the news metro department for the Boston Globe, which at the time was led by Marty. I grew up in New England and was raised on the incredible journalism of the Globe. So again, really happy to be here. Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan newsroom covering the state capitol and urgent statewide issues. The mission of Spotlight PA is to hold powerful private and public forces across Pennsylvania, especially businesses, governments, and special interests, to account through urgent and compelling investigative journalism that drives change, strengthens our democracy, the state, and all who live here. In March 2019, I was hired to essentially turn what was an idea on a couple pieces of paper into a fully fledged statewide newsroom focused on the state capitol and, again, urgent statewide issues, all through the lens of investigative and accountability journalism that gets results. The goal was simple but lofty: build the largest statewide collaborative newsroom in the country, producing some of the best local journalism in the country. In 2 short years, actually less than 2 years, our 2-year birthday is coming up in September, we are indeed the largest statewide newsroom in Pennsylvania, with a team of nearly a dozen journalists holding the powerful to account. We are the largest collaborative news organization of our kind in the country, serving up high quality journalism to 70+ newsroom partners across the state. We're a recognized brand that's trusted and respected as nonpartisan and truly statewide, not aligned with any particular geographic region. And we've, in that short time, built a community of more than 2,100 highly engaged, civically minded members who care deeply about strengthening our democracy. Spotlight PA is funded exclusively through grants and through our members across the state. Where we're headed, with our central positioning, statewide distribution network, and collaborative benefit to all newsrooms, Spotlight PA is well positioned to expand at scale and create local and regional hubs to increase high quality journalism throughout Pennsylvania. This is our sort of 5-year vision moving forward. We feel Spotlight PA can be a one-stop shop approach and can drive impact across the state, drive value to all existing newsrooms without favor, and get up and running quickly. We're currently developing a plan for our first local news hub in State College, and we have interest in the Lehigh Valley as well. What makes Spotlight PA unique? We focus not on duplicating existing coverage or competing in where other newsrooms do things well, or to try to take resources away from what's left. We don't want to diminish in any way what remains of local news in Pennsylvania, but instead we're focused on filling the gap with high quality journalism, filling those areas, coverage areas, topics, but particularly the time intensive and tough accountability and enterprise journalism that has really slipped away as newsrooms have shrunk and have been forced to focus on churning their websites, increasing page views, and increasing ad impressions, and in turn, not spending as much time on the enterprise and accountability journalism that really sets a newsroom apart and really ultimately drives change. We provide all of our work at no charge to our newsroom partners, again, those 70 plus across the state, which in turn helps them enhance their value proposition to their readers, while at the same time allowing us to grow a new statewide network of distribution for Spotlight PA. We're a fresh new brand. Again, no regional geographic alliances. We don't publish any opinion pieces, no editorials. We don't endorse candidates. And that, again, really allows us, I think, to fill a space in Pennsylvania that was lacking, because so much of the media here, even in their heyday, were focused regionally or locally, and no outlet was truly focused statewide. And we've not only been filling that gap, but seeing really wonderful and encouraging responses from readers all across the state and members all across the state. If you looked at any of our growth charts right now, whether it's our newsletter subscribers or web traffic or individual membership, et cetera, those charts are all up and to the right in really strong trajectories. And we feel that this centralized model is, again, just the start of something that can expand more regionally and locally in places like the Lehigh Valley, to be an answer to reversing some of the terrible trends and terrible developments that David mentioned that we've seen in recent times. So anyways, I'm really happy to be here. Looking forward to talking more about all of this and answering any questions anyone might have about Spotlight.
Thank you, Chris, very much. Karen, we're going to turn to you now, and you have all the answers, right? We'll turn over to you.
We're trying to have a few answers anyway, but
Well, good.
We're trying to have a few, but we're looking to invest in people who have great ideas. So thank you so much, David, and thank you everyone who's joining today. Again, I'm Karen Runlett, and I work at Knight Foundation. Before Knight, I did spend my career in local newsrooms, public radio, the Miami Herald for 10 years, very early on, a television station in New York City. And, you know, while I was in a newspaper newsroom, a digital newsroom, digital audience grew, and the major platforms like Facebook and Google, David has talked about this, they acquired such a sizable share of advertising dollars that the business model, the money that supported local journalism and local newspapers dwindled, and the layoffs followed. It was a really difficult time to be in newsrooms. I'm at the Knight Foundation now, and we made a commitment in 2019, David also mentioned this, to invest $300 million over 5 years in the future of local news. And I really want to emphasize the future. We are guided at the Knight Foundation by the words informed and engaged communities. And that is something that you can read in our mission statement and the strategy on our website. And I used to say those words at presentations and people didn't quite get it. And then the day that I flipped it and I said, well, what's the alternative? Misinformed communities or uninformed communities? They got it in an instant. And today, particularly because of where our country is and where it's been in the last year and change, during the pandemic, before elections, during the elections, the racial justice protests of last summer, climate crisis in the country, you understand what happens to your community when your neighbors are misinformed or uninformed. You know. I have a colleague who shared a story with me. He lives in Detroit. Detroit's a Knight community. And there were neighborhoods, largely Latin, Hispanic neighborhoods. And there wasn't enough trusted Spanish language news and information moving into those communities. And so families were gathering well into the pandemic because they didn't know, information wasn't reaching them. And at that point, information was saving lives. So we've been thinking about this, concerned about this for a long time. And again, we made this major commitment to invest in the future of local news. So far, we've invested in a number of organizations. I could fill a lot of time talking about Knight's investments, so I'm just going to highlight 3. One is Report for America. It's a national service organization that places journalists at local news organizations for 2-year reporting stints. And so far, they've placed 300 reporters across the country. They're in public radio newsrooms, they're in digital startups, they're in your traditional newspaper newsrooms. We also funded the ProPublica Local Reporting Network. And that's a program that powers local news organizations with investigative reporting positions, resources in data, research, design. And finally, I'm going to mention Newsmatch. Before I was talking about more reporters. Newsmatch is a fundraising training program, and it helps Newsroom increase some community support. And yes, I'm speaking about financial support. There are newsrooms across the country that have brought major donors in to support their reporting efforts. There are newsrooms across the country that have powered enough contributions at a $25 level, at a $100 level, that it is a significant portion of revenue for news organizations across the country. I finally wanted to say that today's newsroom must co-design with local residents. That's something that we've really identified as critical. Digital entrepreneurs, news startups, they are embarking on listening tours well before they even build an organization, and really trying to understand what information and news a community will use and truly value. Knight is a national funder, and we do see philanthropy as part of the solution, but we certainly can't do it alone. And we are really excited that other local funders like Wichita Community Foundation or the Cleveland Foundation or the Lenfest Institute in Philadelphia, they're connecting the most important local concerns of communities, whether that's homelessness or education or poverty or healthcare, to the fact that residents can only solve those problems if they're informed about these topics. And journalism is the glue that connects them. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you very much, Karen. Perfect. Great. And we turn over to Marty, our final panelist. Marty, thank you so much for being here, and I'll let you go. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. And it's great to be back, even however virtually, in the Lehigh Valley. So I'll get back there in physical presence someday, one of these days.
Oh, that's good. We look forward to it.
Okay. Listen, I think there's a lot of talk about media in this country, very contentious subject, but the real crisis in American media is at the local level. And you're seeing it in Allentown and the Lehigh Valley right now. This is where, and it's critically important at the local level because that's where democracy really begins. These local news organizations, whether they happen to be newspapers or some other form of news organization, have really been at the center of their communities. They're the way that people find out what their government is doing, what the city council is doing, what the county commission is doing, what their school boards are doing, what their police are doing, what the state of the local environment, whatever it might be. This is the way that arts organizations get audience. Local newspapers have told people what's happening in their community. Other community organizations have depended on their local newspapers to tell people what's going on. And now that these news organizations are diminished or disappearing, it's really having a profound community impact in those communities throughout the country. I think it's important to note that a lot of these things that we talk about as local stories are not really local stories. They're national stories. I'm almost certainly best known for the investigation that the Boston Globe did of the Catholic Church cover-up of sexual abuse. But I think it's important to remember that began as a local story. That was a local case in local court. And when we investigated that, it was something of not just citywide impact and regional impact and it was an impact throughout the country and as it turns out, throughout the world. You see that in so many other instances as well. You see that, for example, in Flint, Michigan, where obviously there was terrible water quality. I mean, essentially poisoning people, and that's at a local level. But that is a nationwide problem. We see it again today in the controversy over local policing. That's not just a national story; that's a local story. All of these incidents are occurring at the local level. And whether we're talking about voting rights and election security, elections are supervised at the state and local level, and so it's really important that there be resources at this community level in order to tell people what is happening. You know, I'm often asked what the mission of journalism is, and I say to provide the public the information that it needs and deserves to know in order to be engaged citizens. And if there aren't local news organizations to do that, the reality is there's nobody else there. And what happens is that filling that vacuum are people who have agendas to spread misinformation, disinformation. Some of these outfits that are cropping up now to sort of fill the gap are associated with PR firms or political action organizations or what have you. And they hide their identities. They're not accessible to the community. You don't know who's funding them. You know, with an organization like the Morning Call, you always knew sort of who was behind it. I mean, even today, you know who's behind it. You may not like who's behind it, but you know at least who's there and who to call. And that's not the case in a lot of communities now. As local newspapers have disappeared, other outfits have cropped up. Their origins are unclear. Their resources are from sources that we don't know, and many of them have a hidden agenda. And so I think it's really important that communities figure out a way to support these organizations. You know, Karen talked about the Knight Foundation supporting nonprofits, and I'm on the board of Knight, and of course I very much support that. There's another project that they're helping to support called the American Journalism Project, which raises money at the national level to support nonprofit models throughout the country. But it's a huge problem. I mean, it's even with the resources of a foundation like Knight. I mean, what they're trying to do is show models of success, but they can't fund everything. And frankly, there aren't enough philanthropists who've stepped forward, as you well know, in Allentown to sort of rescue local news organizations. Ultimately, they'll have to find a new model. I think outfits like Spotlight PA are an example of that. That's very much at the state level. I think it's important that we find models at the local level. There are some examples out there. There's some promising signs, but they're flourishing in the sense, David, that you said that there are a lot of new ones being created. But what's the big question mark is how sustainable can they be? And so I think that's something that we all have to work on. I think that's something that the Lehigh Valley community needs to work on, because I don't think that you're going to be able to count on the kind of news coverage that you've had over a long period of time, because hedge funds, their model for news is to treat them as annuities, basically cut costs as quickly as possible, extract as much in cash, get a good return on their investment, and not really worry about what becomes of the news organization over the long run, and not worry in the short run about the quality of the news either. So I think you are likely to see some severe impacts from this acquisition that took place, and I think the time to start working on answers is now. It was probably earlier, but certainly now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you intrigue me with your definition of, what is journalism, what is it? And it reminds me of Jack Fuller's definition. Jack was my former Uber boss at Tribune, and he raised a question, what is journalism? And he says it's providing news and information to people so they can be sovereign. And I think it's interesting because it's kind of more than just entertainment or news for news' sake. It's to let us know how to live our lives, but to be sovereign in terms of fully functioning in a democratic society. So it's not small stuff we're talking about. Can I just ask you to go maybe one level deeper on this? You mentioned, there are certainly implications for these shutdowns and the the paucity of news. And you talk about, what would it be like? What's the world? So what would the world be like? What's the Lehigh Valley like with no media? What happens? Who takes over? You mentioned public relations officers take over. We like public relations officers. Okay. We don't want them to just completely take over though, right? So it's public
Well,
relations,
sure.
it's disinformation. What else? Marty, what does the world look like?
Sure. I mean, I have no problem with public relations professionals at all. Everybody has their job. I mean, I just think that it's important to know that if a media organization is being run by one, that the public should know about that. So, I think I worry, as I said, I worry about local institutions really atrophying. You find that there's nobody covering the local community. There's the local city councils or town councils or whatever they might be called in that particular state. The county level government or the school board. In many of these, I mean, I think it's important to recognize that in many of these like meetings, the meetings themselves, which is just at the surface level, sometimes the only member from the public is somebody from the press. That's the only person there paying any attention. And that's very much at the surface level. The question is sort of looking into what's really what's happening behind the scenes in these communities. And so, and I also think that you find that a lot of community organizations, they're really dependent upon on the coverage by their local papers. And if there's no coverage, then people don't know what's happening. There hasn't been an adequate substitute for that, whether it's, I mean, Facebook hasn't served as an adequate substitute for that. Listservs haven't served as an adequate substitute for that. And what you find is that a lot of arts organizations, for example, start to really suffer when their newspapers, when the local newspapers go out of business. And not just arts organizations, but all sorts of other organizations that depend on community participation. And because the local newspapers cover that, they tell people what's happening in their community. They tell them why they should care. Who's going to tell you what's happening if the bridge is out, or that the bridge is going to be out, or why the bridge is failing, or when it's going to be fixed, or why it's not being fixed more quickly. Where I'm living at the moment, there are like tons of bridges that are out, and somebody needs to cover that and let you know, like, who's solving this problem? Why is it that I can't even get from point A to point B? And why are these things not being addressed? What is happening with my tax dollars? All of these issues are what newspapers have traditionally done. And I think it's important to recognize that when that radio and television are highly dependent on coverage by the local newspapers. Their coverage is largely derivative of what already appears in the local newspapers. So without the local newspapers, they just don't have the reporting staffs that local newspapers have traditionally had, and they'll start to suffer as well.
Good, Chris. That's sobering, Marty, but thank you, Chris Baxter. Same thing, but very quickly, just in a sentence. You can tell us, envision Pennsylvania without investigative journalism, without media, and maybe without you. What would be an example of a major story that your organization did this year that we wouldn't have seen? Just give us one.
Sure, I'll give you one example. We wrote a story about how the state police in Pennsylvania, which is the fourth largest statewide law enforcement agency in the country, had quietly stopped tracking the race of drivers who get pulled over. Why is that important? Well, if you don't have that data, it's impossible to detect systematic racial profiling if it exists. We uncovered the fact that they had stopped it, dug into why, which was very nebulous. And as a result of some really great reports in January of this year, the state police has resumed tracking that data and signed a data analysis contract with the University of Cincinnati to resume doing that. So that's one small example of what can go without it. And it has been really sobering for us. We started 4 or 5 months before the pandemic hit, and the state government was suddenly in everybody's living room, deciding where you can go and what you can do and whether you can work. And we look at all of our coverage, not just of the coronavirus, but everything we've done in these short, under 2 years. And almost all of it would not have existed if we weren't doing it, because that's what we focus on. We focus on those stories and those topics that are not being covered. And
Very
so when
good.
you just scroll through and look
Yeah.
at the body of work, it's striking what would go untold
It
if
is. It's
an
which is
outlet's not there.
yes, which is exactly what I was thinking about, and I think we need to all kind of be aware of that. Definitely everybody in this room, for sure. You know, Karen, we hear the words media death spiral, right? The economy driving this kind of spiral of media, and it's really not just newspapers. All types of media are struggling. But why is this so misunderstood by the average person? I cited that poll where people seem to think things are fine. What's going on there? And, people kind of talk like, I don't know where I heard it. Where'd you get that information? I don't know. I heard it online. Why people don't draw this connection to their local media? They don't draw the connection that, probably most or maybe 80% is estimate of, news that we read is coming from traditional media still. So why don't people make this connection?
Well, one thing is that there's less local journalism, but there's a lot more media. There's a lot more information out there and misinformation. So technology has really accelerated that. So people are getting more information or misinformation, and they're not realizing what they've lost in the process. That's a big part of it. I think that it is a conversation that's going on with journalists, and journalists have been talking about it for well over a decade. What's happened to the business model and what the internet has done, and social media and platforms, just how it's changed the way people consume news. I think also too, there is another generation coming that is not going to know what a newspaper was delivered to the lawn, the front lawn. It's going to be push notification. There's a current generation that knows push notifications and newsletters. And there is a coming generation that might be getting news and information off of TikTok and thinking about individual creators. So I think the world is changing, and I think that also journalism hasn't necessarily told that story as well outside of its own circles.
Yeah, there's certainly what you describe as sort of this grazing model. People just kind of graze on all this stuff that's out there, and it's certainly different for good. I mean, certainly a lot of it is very good, and we certainly can't overlook that. But it certainly is different than the model of years old, where the one newspaper arrived on your doorstep and that was kind of the thing. Same way that encyclopedias were, or these other central warehouses of information, and we don't have that. It's very much diversified and fractured. So I don't know that we totally get that, but certainly people don't understand it. And I don't know whose failure it is. Maybe it's a failure of media. It's just the way it is. But we certainly have that as probably potentially one of our biggest obstacles. Marty, very quickly, we talk about some of these papers, certainly your former Washington Post, the New York Times, really experiencing a renaissance, right? There's been, various reasons why that is, the political cycle of news and so on and so forth. The hunger for facts, as I mentioned. Why is this why is this kind of renaissance bypassing local papers?
Sure. Well, there's a reason that the New York Times and the Washington Post are having greater success, and that is because they can achieve scale. They write about things that are happening at the national level, let's say, the presidency, and just about everybody in the country is interested in that, in national politics. So they can get readers throughout the country, and they can get advertising that reaches the entire country, and they can get subscriptions from people throughout the country, and not just from around the country, but around the world. So that's not an option that's really available to local news outlets. I mean, I think it's important to remember that it wasn't preordained that that national outlets were going to be the most successful ones. There was a time where people said they were going to be the ones that suffered the most because Google was going after their business, and that local news outlets would be protected. The New York Times stock fell from $50 a share to $3.50 a share at one point. People were predicting the New York Times would go out of business. They had to go get a financial rescue from a billionaire in Mexico. The Washington Post was predicted to fail as well. So they turned things around, and I think it's important that we not be, we don't want to be Pollyannish. We also don't want to be totally despairing. One of the favorite quotes of mine is by a now late Nobel Prize winner, and he says, if you can't see the invisible, you can't do the impossible. So ultimately, you need to be able to see what's not immediately visible, and you have to think that you can succeed. And I think it's possible. I think there are examples out there that, it's great to see Spotlight PA doing well from the start. There's in Minneapolis, there's MinnPost, Texas Tribune in Texas, of course, has been out around for a long while. Cal Matters in California. Now, those are at statewide level, but there are others even at the local level who are doing some interesting work, something called the Vermont Digger, you name it. There are a number of them out there. We need to see more of that. We need to know what the elements of success are. But ultimately, people have to pay one way or the other. There's a trade-off that needs to take place. And one is that people need to pay either through a membership model or through a subscription if it's a commercial enterprise. And in exchange for that, these news outlets need to offer people something that's really worth paying for. Otherwise, why would anybody pay? So that's the trade that needs to take place. And we need to see that play out in more communities than it is today.
Thank you. Karen, so a number of you have mentioned, the philanthropic model, the nonprofit model, and some believe it's the best model, the only model that really is going to stave off future decline. That failed. The effort to, save the morning call, it was being called, failed because Lehigh Valley's wealthy benefactors did not step up. They stepped up time and time again to save other organizations. Why did that fail this time? And why does it seem to, is it the best model? Is it the model where you think we're going to see if you could predict? But why isn't it taking off more than it is?
I'm sorry, the nonprofit news model? Why isn't it?
Nonprofit, the philanthropic model where news organizations are receiving philanthropic donations to continue.
Right.
Why
so-
is that not catching on?
So,
And why did it fail? Why did it fail in the Lehigh Valley, for example?
So I will say there are, Marty just pointed to a number of examples where it has been successful at the statewide level. And I think it's successful in some places. I also want to mention an organization like Outlier Media in Detroit. That's an organization where they know that their audience gets text messages and reads text messages. And so they communicate directly with their residents. They give them solutions to their problems, and they take the data and the information from the frequently asked questions, and they turn that into investigative journalism. They share it with multiple outlets there. I think that nonprofit news actually is finding its footing in a number of communities. I think it's often championed by a local philanthropist and individual. That's often been the case. There, in some cases, some community foundations have championed it. There's also another organization called Chalkbeat. Chalkbeat has 8 local offices now, and they have a waiting list, but they go into communities where they're invited by community and invited by philanthropy, because they want to make sure that they have the money to do the work for a few years. So there are also some for-profit models that are, right in your state. There are a number of independent outlets that have sprung up as well, that are hyper-local. So digital startups.
Yes, very good. Yeah, and you're also working with Chris Cruson and his network of independent
Yes,
online
Lion
publishers to teach organizations how to create a startup. Chris actually was also a morning call person. He's running that great organization now. And you're helping to fund his organization, correct?
He's a great leader, and they're doing really very, very strong work. And they're also finding ways for an individual reporter to start a website and make a living from that.
Yeah, I've about 2 more questions or so, and this really for all of you, or whoever feels that you could answer this. If it were possible, wouldn't it be the best solution for newspapers just to tomorrow cease printing publication and turn over all those resources of printing and delivery and all that stuff to build up the best possible digital news operation? I understand, the difficulty in most of the revenue is still coming from, in some cases, in most cases, still coming from print in those organizations. But why doesn't everybody just take that leap? When's the time? When is that going to happen? Does anybody have a beat on that?
Well, I don't want to make a prediction about when it's going to happen. It's going to happen naturally anyway, because print circulation is going to drop to a point where it's not.
But I mean, I guess the question is, should organizations just be more proactive and hurry it up?
Hard to know. I mean, you have to know exactly where the money's coming from.
Yeah.
The reality is that local newspapers still make a lot of money from print advertising, and that's why they keep it going. They don't keep it going out of because they are romanticizing it.
No.
They keep it going because they're getting money from it. If they didn't get money from it, they wouldn't keep it going. I mean, I think ultimately that's going to be the model. Is you're just going to have to eliminate all of those costs. The hard part is replacing the revenue that you get from the print model, because the revenue online is far below what you would get in print, pennies on the dollar. And so for digital advertising, which is why everybody's seeking, you can't just turn to digital advertising, you have to turn to digital subscriptions. And people have to pay for a subscription because the advertising simply will not pay the bills.
That's right. That's right. More and more, that's the case. I want to pose a hypothetical ethical question. Okay. If companies such as Alden will only do harm, as many believe, okay? Should readers boycott it? Or does this just hurt the community more? Does this hurt the local newspaper more, the local news organization? Or is it just unethical to give even $1 to an entity that has history of taking profits from the bottom line and not improving the quality of the product or the journalism?
Well, I mean, I think it's an unanswerable question, but I mean, I think that, look, as long as they're doing work that's necessary, I would tend to support it. If they don't continue to do that, then there's no reason you should buy a subscription. I mean, it would just be a basic, as a subscriber, I wouldn't pay for something that doesn't provide any value. I wouldn't stop subscribing simply as a matter of protest. I would stop subscribing if they fail to provide the kind of value that you expect in a local newspaper.
Very good, very good. Okay, I have a final question for all of our panelists. And if you could, each of you quickly spend a little time answering this. We've dwelt a lot on things to really make us worry. It's all a little depressing. I'd really like to ask the three of you, what has inspired you lately? Over the last year or so, we've seen things shift, and the last 2 years shift very radically, and especially in the last year, things have quickened. So with all this disruption in the industry, what has inspired you? Is it the work of an individual? What is it? If there's one thing you could name.
I guess I'll go first. Well, I think it's just the work that people have done over the past year. I think it's just been an incredibly stressful year. It started with the pandemic. None of us expected to actually live through a pandemic. All of us had to essentially evacuate our offices, work remotely for the very first time, try to cover a community while not incurring health risks. I mean, there were health risks just in trying to do what we normally do, which is actually be eyewitnesses to events beyond the scene. Then we had obviously a very, with the protests for racial justice over the course of the year. There were high tensions, and there were risks for the reporters who were covering that, mostly from the police, frankly, and who were really abusing journalists who were just trying to do their jobs. And then, of course, we had an election that was incredibly tense. And also involved risks for reporters who have been threatened repeatedly, online and physically. And so the fact that, reporters and all the other journalists in our newsroom were able to sort of come together and serve the community and give people the facts, I think was incredibly inspiring to me.
Yeah, it's very hurtful to hear people wish bad things for reporters because they are risking their lives every day. Karen, could you answer that for us very quickly? What's inspired you?
So it's been an extraordinary year around the world. This was, we were watching the president, we were watching our governors, we were watching our mayors. We were really listening to our local leaders. We were listening to our state leaders. And a lot of the pandemic for us, we were at home. So it was block by block. And I think that local journalists told me where to get tested for COVID, told me where to get my vaccine, but then turned around and challenged, local officials, like, is it equitable, or is everyone having the same access? That's very powerful. They provided a lot of life-saving information. And I think they also worked very hard to make sure that we had facts about an election that was, contested for some time. And I will finally say, I live in Miami-Dade County, and locally, we had very high turnout around elections this year. And that's one of the things that local news does. It rallies people around topics and information, and people are more engaged and they vote more.
Yeah, you mentioned the election, Karen, and what reporters did in the election. If you all want to just look it up and search on a tweet, as Andy Wagaman, a reporter for the Morning Call, talked about what his night was like covering the election, basically moving from one coffee shop to another, never really being able to find a good port in the storm. But it's certainly a more inconvenient world for reporters today than certainly with what I grew up with. And finally, Chris, inspirational moment for you.
I mean, to me, it's the reporters on the ground. I mean, no matter who owns your local media outlet or what they're going through, there are reporters on the ground who are never going to be famous. They're never going to make a lot of money, and they only do it because they give a damn. And it's those, the ones we have left, the ones who are fighting the fight, especially the ones today and the leaders today who are, to be frank, making up for some mistakes of the legacy media, listening to the community, paying attention to equity inside the newsroom and in the coverage. There's a lot of great people and great things happening. And so I just would implore you, when you see that journalism, when you read that journalism, support it. Support the people who are trying to make the difference. And just remember that, the reporters on the ground are out there in large part for you and for all of us. And there's not a lot of glory in it. And in fact, as Marty said, there's been a lot of danger and a lot of else that has come with it of late. And so that's what inspires me, is the people who are out here every day doing the work, being creative, collaborating, and trying to find the path forward.
That's very good. And I thank you. And I would urge maybe just everybody, if you have an opportunity to kind of explain things to somebody who is really, struggling with the media today or critical of the media, take some time to explain it. Very, very, really appreciate it. Really nice job by panelists. And now we're gonna have an opportunity to turn things over to Erica and hear from our audience. We have questions.
Yes, we have a number of questions in the chat box.
Some really good ones.
Thanks to everyone. If you do have more questions, please type them in. I'll be reading them for all of our panelists, Chris, David, Karen, and Marty, to respond to. There was a little bit of back and forth about the Morning Call situation and the Morning Call Guild. I'll just say that's something that certainly has inspired me in the past year, was the Morning Call Guild. They really kept the topic of what's happening in our local paper front and center. So thanks to them. I know several of them are on the call today for keeping that issue in front of us, so we're all aware of what's happening. So a question from Ray Holton. I think this one's for you, Karen. How is that foundation supported concept working in places like St. Pete's, Florida, and Philadelphia?
So Philadelphia, are we talking about the Lenfest Institute? Because
I think so. Yeah, that's the one I'm familiar with. Yes.
So that's so far, that's a radically new model that has been effective, and there are other organizations. There are other organizations and there are other philanthropists across the country who are trying to replicate that model in other communities. So there's still, ultimately, philanthropy is supporting some of the work, but all these organizations still have to have a business plan and still have to have advertising and membership support. And so philanthropy is part of the solution, but they still have to be sound businesses.
Thank you. Question from Barry Kessler. Are journalism programs still alive and well in colleges and universities? So maybe that's a question for David.
Yes. Well, numbers are down, but numbers are down in many different areas as well. I mean, colleges are certainly struggling in a broader sense, but yeah, so the programs are not the size they once were, but there's tremendous passion. I know on a local basis, I know that the Lehigh University, I don't know if it's the case now, but certainly over the last 5 years, they've had to add additional sections for the journalism courses, okay, because they were so popular. So some of this renaissance you've been seeing nationally has definitely spurred on students to enter the industry. And, the students are very aware of what the industry is, okay? And they're coming into it anyway, which is, to me, that's probably my inspiring thing, to see these students so interested, to take on something that is really going to be difficult, a difficult career. So that, yes, it's an astounding thing, but I think journalism schools are pretty healthy. I think some of you others may know a little bit more about that, but.
Thank you. Actually, another question from Barry. Is there a perception that local news is more factual or impartial these days than national news?
The answer to that is yes. If you actually look at trust in media, local news outlets have significantly greater levels of trust than national outlets. And there tends to be less polarization as a result of their coverage than there is by national outlets, which is understandable. I mean, if you're covering, the presidency, if you're covering Donald Trump, there's going to be a greater degree of polarization over that subject than there is going to be about what's happening in your local school board. But they do tend to be trusted also because people, they know who they are, they know they can call, they can stop in and visit. There's a greater sense of access. They encounter the journalists in their community, whether they're covering their local meetings or whether they're the editor or publisher happens to show up for community foundations or whatever it might be. So they are known quantities in their communities. And so there is overall a higher level of trust.
Thank you, Marty. A question from the Sturshicks. Is there a measurable difference in engagement with the news between digital platforms and the print edition of a newspaper? Who'd like to take that one?
I can.
Karen or Marty, both of you? It's fine.
Karen wants to take it on, that's fine.
I
Go ahead.
I will say that there are really some pretty exciting examples of digital startups that are pushing the boundaries on service and engagement. I can point to an organization like Epicenter in New York, which serves the Bengali community in the city. And they actually had an effort to register folks for vaccines. I mean, that's an action oriented. There's great work by WHYY in Philadelphia, the public radio station. The digital efforts and the digital conversations that they've engaged in around poverty have been really well received and have changed policy. So I think there are a lot of really interesting digital tools that exist today. And I also mentioned before, there's an organization out in California called Oakland Side. They did a listening tour and they really found out what people wanted information and news about. And they started in a pandemic and people still wanted information about the arts. And it caught them off guard because the people needed relief and they from a very difficult time, and they wanted to support their cultural institutions, and they wanted to see something that was beautiful in a time of great darkness.
Thank you for sharing. And
I would just add very quickly. Yeah, very quickly. I mean, unquestionably, many more, exponentially more opportunities for engagement in the digital format. No question. Sharing, commenting, various tools, polls, maps, the long tail of stories where you continue to cover a story, like for example, Spotlight, I mean, which was the Spotlight team, the way they covered the church story, today, imagine that with all of the various digital tools we have, but that story was kept alive by the Boston Globe by writing story upon story upon story. Imagine that today with this robust digital environment, it only helps. It's a bright, encouraging world, if we could get there, but definitely more engagement and all upside on that. It really is. I personally believe it would be better for us to jump sooner than later into the digital, just go all in, because I'm afraid this is not going to work, trying to support all these legacy costs in newspapers and also build digital enterprise at the same time. There's just not enough resource to go around.
A question from Margaret McConnell. Is there any advice you can give to arts organizations and nonprofits who rely so heavily on local journalism that is diminishing so fast? So for example, are there other areas where these organizations have joined together to get specific coverage or messages out about their services, especially to underserved communities?
Well, you're gonna have you have to develop your own social media presence. I mean, that's probably the only way. Social media and newsletters and things like that. You can collaborate with other arts institutions to do that. You can do it on your own or other nonprofits, so that that people can be notified through email, text, whatever it might be, Facebook, you name it, of what's actually happening in your organizations. But you would have to do it yourself and really understand how to get people's attention through those means.
I would just add, particularly in the nonprofit space, we see, again, I've said before, stressing creativity. We see a lot of creative partnerships and solutions with community organizations around nonprofit journalism, whether it's co-fundraising campaigns where every dollar of a membership equals $1 to the local food bank, whether it's creative partnerships with arts organizations to fill maybe an artistic need of the newsroom, but also a business sponsorship need of a local organization. I would say, again, with a lot of these nonprofits, Spotlight PA included, we're trying to kind of break down some of the traditional ways of doing business and find more creative ways, while of course not impeding whatsoever on the independence of the journalism. But I would say there are more creative ways, and to think creatively and not be afraid to approach and just ask or have a conversation.
Coverage of arts and all that has always been a real niche area, but so important because the people who are interested in are very engaged in that topic. Okay, so it's maybe not as many people interested in topic A, B, or C or whatever, but it's a very engaged, like the sports audience is very engaged in sports. Not everybody is a sports fan, but those who are very engaged. So I think there's, I would advise you folks who are having trouble getting coverage, before you give up, really hold your local news organization to task and, call them, email them, really demand coverage. And I mean, that's what I'm concerned that the public is giving up on media. And I think you have to still hold your local media, communicate with them, find out who the editor is, find out who the reporter is on the beat, and really demand the coverage. I think, we shouldn't give up.
Thank you, David. A question from Mike Wilson for Marty. Can you take us into the Washington Post newsroom and talk about the story selection process?
Oh, God. That's a long subject, but I mean, I don't know what it has to do with local news, but look, I mean, most things are bubble up. I mean, the reporters are the ones who are in the front lines. They're in the field. They follow different beats for the most part, and they know what's happening in their areas of coverage. And so they, in collaboration and discussions with their editors, either propose ideas or their editors will see patterns to the coverage and suggest things that we should be exploring more, that should be explored in greater depth. And stories take shape that way. Some of the stories come from a higher level, like would have come from my level as well. I was just reviewing something for a book that I'm writing about our coverage of the Secret Service in 2014. the failures of the Secret Service. There were a number of stories that we had about lapses and embarrassing episodes. And I asked the reporter, is there a pattern here? Is there something systemically wrong with the Secret Service? And we got together and discussed that. And she said she was aware of other incidents. And so we decided to really investigate that. And sure enough, there were systemic problems in the Secret Service, which is a entirely non-transparent organization, obviously, and hardly covered, and has great PR. But it was a problem. It was a problem-plagued organization. And so, we decided to investigate that, and we ended up winning a Pulitzer for that coverage. But it takes place so many different ways, and then you have even graphics people, for example, who now can come up with more effective ways of telling the stories. Maybe working with our video people, or audio people, or people who are specialized in animation, or whatever it might be. We have lots of incredibly effective storytelling tools now. And so they'll propose a way of telling the story, like what happened on January 6th, and tracking the movements of people who broke into the Capitol and traveled through the Capitol. Where were they? At what time? What was taking place? You can essentially recreate that with some combination of graphics, animation, video, audio, original documents from court records, all of that. And it can be a very effective storytelling tool.
Thank you. In that vein, how do you think about equity when it comes to news delivery? So, having articles that are interesting for different community members, or perhaps that bring different perspectives to an incident. Who'd like to take that one? Karen?
So what I would say there is that there are certainly there have been some, successful collaboratives, partnerships between a legacy newspaper, a public radio station, an ethnic newspaper, and they've been able to commit to reporting. It happened in Philadelphia. There's an organization called Resolve Philly. It's 20 news organizations that collaborate, and they serve their audiences, based on audience need and what they're best at doing. So if they're the best at creating a podcast and going deep on a particular slice of the topic, they'll do that. They covered poverty for a year. And there was an African-American owned radio station, WURD, and they did a lot of the convening and sort of the town hall conversations that were broadcast on the radio station. So I think that partnerships are really important. And a lot of times there is a larger organization and a smaller organization, and it's about really coming to an understanding of the fact that you're both doing important work for your communities and agreeing on how you'll share and plan to do the work together.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone. This is our last question. I see David just posted a picture. That was you, David, right?
Yeah, some folks in the chat are asking for resources about fake news, and without her permission, I've given a picture there that was published in the Muhlenberg magazines by Sarah Vigneri, one of my colleagues out there at Muhlenberg. And it's really just a quick look at, kind of how to get your head on straight about recognizing fake news. And I want to add, I put it in the chat as well. So I put that in, but also Snopes.com, SNOPES.com. When you get those crazy kind of conspiracy theories that your cousin from Kalamazoo emails you, you check it out on Scopes before you forward it, okay? And read the links before you forward them.
Thanks. And to, I guess, finish this, we always like to talk about next steps and actions for the audience. So Jim Yergi has a great question. Just to summarize, what suggestions would you, all of our panelists, have for our members today in terms of funding that could best help local newspaper efforts to maintain the local news, given what you're aware of for our situation?
Well, I mean, It depends what you want to do. You can sort of try to organize some sort of effort to have a nonprofit outlet strictly in the Lehigh Valley and try to convene people to have that discussion. Certainly a community foundation can be central to that effort. Some are, some have been, or somebody else can sort of take that upon themselves to do it. But bringing people together and build support for that and start with a skeletal organization that would actually provide local news coverage. I mean, that's how some of this has happened in other communities, whether it's in Denver or you name it, in other places. But somebody needs to sort of take the initiative and bring together people who are interested in figuring out a way to give people seed money. And it can't just be the people who are starting these organizations, these nonprofits can't just be a bunch of well-meaning journalists. They need to be people who know something about technology and people who know something about how to run a business.
Yeah, it does seem, sorry to jump in here, but it does seem like this is going to have to be rebuilt one community at a time.
Yeah, I'll just add with Spotlight, even though we started as a statewide organization, as I mentioned at the outset, we are looking to expand to local operations hand in hand with the existing media outlet there. We're working on with a coalition right now in State College and Center County, hand in hand with WPSU and the Center Daily Times, to bring a real significant infusion of reporting talent there in a short amount of time to plug it right into the Spotlight operation without having to create kind of all the back end stuff again. And I think that is certainly something we're interested in other communities across the state, including the Lehigh Valley. So I'd be happy to talk to anyone more who might be interested in that.
In a lot of communities, by the way, public radio has stepped in stepped in and filled some of the gap that was left by diminished or disappearing local newspapers.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, many of us kind of, or some of us, kind of see the trajectory of news over the last 40, 50 years and really see kind of this heyday of journalism. And and think it was coming always like that. And it really wasn't. It's a relatively very, very brief period in history where we had this, dynamic media operating where, thousands and thousands of papers in tiny communities across the country. It's very unusual. It's certainly fallen apart, but it wasn't not always like that. So it's you don't have to go back too far to see how it kind of was, in its infancy. And unfortunately, we're a little bit spoiled because we know what a robust press can be. It seems though it's almost it's getting back to zero. And again, I think we have to rebuild community by community.
Karen, any final comments from you?
Just resources. I would say that the Institute for Not-for-Profit News and Lion Publishers, you mentioned Chris Cruson before, both those organizations help people start up organizations, and they have a lot of expertise and they have hundreds of members, and people really learn faster when they have peer organizations to turn to who can say, we made this mistake, we didn't. It is about gathering financial support as well within the community, and as well as finding those who want to be the reporters and the journalists. So those are two organizations. And I just want to mention too, I did put it in the chat. This is very, very new, but there is an organization called the National Trust for Local News. And there was an experiment. They recently purchased papers that were going to be bought by a hedge fund, and they've designed and created a public benefit corporation that's very, very new. So we'll see how that goes, like in the last couple months.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Karen. And thank you again to our panelists. That wraps up our question and answers, at least all the time we have for today. I'm going to hand it back over to Mike Stershik to close.
Oh, I was on mute. Sorry about that. Thanks, Erica. And I want to thank our panelists, Chris, for all you've done in enlightening us about the role of Spotlight PA and its nonprofit mission around Pennsylvania. Karen, thank you for all you've done in introducing us to the Knight Foundation and for all your comments in the chat. There's some good resources that you mentioned in the chat, and we appreciate that. And Marty, as always, it's great to hear you and see you, and thanks for your participation in this. This has been, I'm going to quote Ray Hulton because we did this in the chat, but this was an excellent presentation and discussion, and it's so critical for spreading understanding among the citizenry. And Ray, you're right on. That's something that is critical to what we're trying to accomplish as a community foundation in doing this to begin with. So thank you all for your participation. I also want to thank Jim Yergi for asking a great last question. Jim, thank you for doing that. That wraps up our program for today. Thank you all for your participation. We appreciate this, and we look forward to seeing the members of the Board of Associates on September 23rd at 4 o'clock at Saucon Valley Country Club, where we'll hopefully be reconvening in person to recognize Bernie's accomplishments as he retires from the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation. Thank you all, and have a great day.
Thank you so much,
I
everybody.
forgot to thank you too.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your efforts in putting this together and for really working your way through the questions and making this successful. Thank you, David.
Go hug a reporter or an editor.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye now. Thank you.
Please.